On the 4th of January 2018, I was terrified. Absolutely terrified. I was terrified because I was going back to Nepal for the first time in 2 years, having a role running this nonprofit from the ground up that Nick Abraham got me involved in. It was time to go back to Nepal. But I'd gotten sick the last time I was there in 2015. A lot of food poisoning, unrefrigerated pork sausages. Long story for another time. And after dreading going back for so long, to finally get back there, I found something I never expected to find. Wow. I just remember, okay, so Nick, for a bit of context, Nick set up a brick factory in Nepal to help provide jobs in this rural community. And he had this brick factory, and then he built a little home office that we would stay out of, and he lived there on the brick factory. So it was a tiny little thing. So Nepal in January is freezing. It's like 0 degrees at night with not proper insulation and not really any heating. The bathroom is an outhouse, so it's separate. So you got to walk outside in the cold to get to the bathroom. He did have hot water this time, which was an addition, but the shower stream was so weak, the flow of the water was so weak, and the water was either completely freezing or super hot, and it was actually very hard to get it in between. So when I was showering, and for those watching the YouTube video can see me doing it, I was basically swaying in and out of the water so that it wouldn't burn my skin. That's how I would shower. To top it all off, bless, but the workers had put the toilet way too close to the wall, right up against the wall, so you couldn't sit there naturally and flay your legs out. And basically got one knee on the wall, and it was so awkward, you know. Again, and I had the weirdest diet, trying not to get food poisoning, Vegemite and hot chips. So it wasn't the most comfortable time, right? Cramped in there, living on top of each other. Yet, somehow, the 10 days in January were 10 of the happiest days I've ever had in my whole life. And it didn't make sense. So welcome to the With Joe Wehbe Podcast. This is part 1 of the Minimum Viable Lifestyle, and we're kicking things off with this podcast with what I consider to be probably the most important of all the principles and frameworks we'll discuss, the minimum viable lifestyle. And this episode intimidates me because it's so hard to try and do this justice. I don't think what I got to in the end was that I can't actually do this justice. I'll try my best to establish the base of the framework, but we're going to continually refer to this because it's a simple concept, but all the ways it's created value for me and those friends of mine and people around me who've tried to adopt this concept, which will be very similar for those familiar with essentialism and minimalism. The value and the amount of crossover and flow through areas has been remarkable. It sets everything in line for me. So I hope it creates some value for all of you. So let's go back to Nepal, to me staying with Nick and Jake in the brick factory, and why this was such a special time. Why, when I was almost least comfortable, I was almost most happiest. Despite having all these wonderful experiences, traveling the world, staying in luxury places, always having all the comforts I could have wanted growing up, never any problems. So why was this such a happy time? Well, we'd wake up every morning. Nick, which he still does today, plays Lion King to wake the opening credits song. He plays that to wake you up early in the morning and you're freezing. You know, we huddle around, we have a bit of breakfast. By about 8 o'clock, the first workers come in to the office, normally Bishnu with a big smile on her face. And then, you know, a lot of the guys come down for breakfast. The cook rocks up with a, cute little boy and used to play with him a lot during the day. Then the factory's full of life. People are coming in for their orders of bricks. Locals come in, always popping their head in to say hi. You know, the beautiful local people there, much more social than what I was used to and friendly with strangers. I was sitting there reading Sapiens, I remember at the time, and I didn't have to leave this little spot for so much life and community to just happen around me. So at the end of each day, we'd get on top of the pile of bricks, we'd watch sunset over the beautiful Sunku Plains, and by night we'd get together, cook, sit around the fire, we'd tell stories, we'd talk about, we'll really have the most interesting conversations about Nepal, about the cultural differences, about the experience of being there, the great appreciation for life you have when you're there. And it was beautiful. There was no need for Netflix or TV. There was no gaps to fill. It was all so peaceful. And I spent less than like $10 a day while I was there. That sort of experience really changes the way you value things. And for me at that time, for context, I'd started, I guess, my first kind of real formal business, like the real estate business. And I'd spent that year leading up to it, working really hard, burning the hours, not having a lot of fun all the time, because I thought I've got to not enjoy now so I can enjoy some imaginary point in the future. I was putting off living. In that year as well, I noticed that I really started to lose the prioritization of friends and I guess family too, and I got a bit off balance because I was focusing on one line of my balance sheet of life. And Nepal, really, that experience shifted that. So I'm going to basically defecate in this piece all over the idea of delayed gratification. Though ironically, MVL teaches you to make do with less, which is quite ironic. I never really thought about that before. But one of the big things for me was going past that idea that I'm not going to live now for an idea that comes in the future. Because we anchor and we put pressure on some imagined end state. So for me, it was when this business is at this level, then I'll be happier, then I'll enjoy it, then I'll have more permission to do things that I more intrinsically and internally are driven to do, rather than what I think is the best thing I should be doing. So let's fast forward a bit. Let's talk about now, or as close to now as possible. So what do I do now? So even during the week and the weekends and the weekdays are quite similar actually at the moment in many ways, but mainly I get up at like 5 a.m. We have a thing called 5:30 Club, which is a bunch of people you meet up, your morning community that you meet up at a local cafe with. So I see some really close friends first thing in the morning. And in that cafe, I normally start my day with writing. One of the cool projects I'm working on, probably to Hat Labs, most specifically at the moment, or the blog, or books, and I love writing. Writing is something I do for what I'd call an audience of none, for no one. I'd write stuff that no one would ever read. I just enjoy doing it, if for no one else but for me. So I get to do that, and a lot of my day is spent working on really cool stuff at the moment, very fortunately, stuff I'm doing largely with cool people. By the afternoon, I go do normally a little bike ride, and then after that I come home, I do some reading, dinner with family, and then at night I do a bit more reading or a bit more work. At some points in the week, I make time to call or catch up with friends. On weekends, we've got social activities that we normally try and plan that recur, so it's easy to stay in touch with people. When there's no COVID, it's karaoke the last Saturday of every month. So if you bump into someone during the month and you're worried you're not going to get to see them again because you hardly see them, you're like, be at karaoke. Damn you, COVID. Why'd you ruin karaoke for me? But there's a couple of other things in there, and, soccer and other things I get to do, and that balanced lifestyle just works. So just to clarify, The minimum viable lifestyle is not necessarily about aiming low. There's, even in the real estate business and anything I've done since, I always try and bring the fullest intention to what I'm doing. There's still things I'd love to achieve. But this framework is based around us all very often asking the wrong question. If there's one wrong question we got to stop asking, it's, what's the most my life can be? What's the most my life can be? Sounds pretty negative, right? Bear with me. Because the question I ask myself more often than that, and the question I believe more people should be asking themselves, is what's the least my life can be? Because the most is actually really hard or almost impossible to define. Whereas the least is clear. It's at what point are things good enough that I'm pretty happy with them. Now, the funny part is the least is normally pretty easy to obtain, and it's more enjoyable. The most is normally very difficult and very competitive. So this is what happened when I came back from that trip in Nepal, and later that year I kept thinking about this lesson about, wow, why do I spend so much time, energy working and just doing work for the sake of work and not work that feels effortless? And I started thinking, is it for money? I was like, well, how much money do I actually need to be really comfortable and happy? So I started taking less and less out of the business. So it's like, is it $2,000 a month? And $2,000 a month was more than enough. I was like, can I live off $1,000 a month? And $1,000 a month was more than enough. Sometimes I'd spend $600 or less in a single month. And in Sydney, one of the most expensive cities to live in the world, with the comfort of, living at home at that time, of course, I was still pretty happy. There really wasn't much I was missing out on. That doesn't mean that that's what I live on now or what I intend to live on for the rest of my life. But it's very useful knowing the least my life can be, because now I can make decisions knowing that I will be able to, if I need to delay anything, delay a lot or put off a lot or sacrifice a lot, but still be very, very happy and comfortable. For example, if I need to work on something that's very mission-based and important to me, that doesn't pay me quickly, doesn't pay me tomorrow, or it's going to pay off in the long run, I know I've got the durability to spend a lot of time working on that, because I know I will enjoy whatever years I spend working on that, because I have my minimum viable lifestyle in place. The lifestyle I described to you that I live now, it costs me a cup of coffee a morning to go to the coffee shop. It doesn't cost me anything to write. If anything, writing could be a whole career. Maybe it won't. I imagine it will, but maybe it won't. That's fine. I'll find ways to make it work. I get to spend a lot of that time, right? It doesn't cost me anything to do that. There are some other things that are important to me. I love travel. COVID has limited travel at the moment. I still do some local getaways with friends and things like that. It doesn't cost that much. So all the really valuable things in life I learned normally don't cost that much. And they're normally obtainable pretty quickly. The highest quality time I have is time writing and time feeling connected to other people. And in this day and age, you don't really have to pay to be connected to other people. If you do, you might be doing something wrong. I don't know. But that's the power of this framework. It's the balance sheet. And so we can come back to talking about the most. This is tricky. And this is why the perspective of a culture that was very different to a Western country was really important. because the value system is different and it's not as heavily influenced by capitalism. Because when you want to try and figure out the most, right? So what's the most successful business in the world, or who's the prettiest or sexiest person in the world? Who's got the best house in the world? Who's got the best house in your neighborhood, to make it more relatable? Right? Who's the prettiest or sexiest person in your year? Whatever, man. You know what I'm talking about. When we're aiming that high, the problem is that the optimal is based on a consensus of multiple people, not just you. When you aim for the highest, right? The most successful businessman. If it's Richard Branson, if it's Elon Musk, who knows? But it's kind of decided by consensus. And the problem with that is that consensus can change. You become dependent on other people's opinions for your happiness. You don't actually have control. Those standards, you may not have ever realized that, don't actually come from you. They come from others. And one of the painful slaps you'll ever get in your face is delaying gratification to achieve something you think is going to make you happy that you never even realized didn't come from you. It's an idea conceived in you by what the collective values and wants. When you do the MVL exercise, when you sit down and ask, what's the least my life can be? And we'll unpack the mechanics of it in the follow-up episodes. But when you sit down and do that, you're forced to think about one person and what one person needs. And that's you. A lot of our wants are really influenced by our culture. A lot of our needs are individual. I need to spend a lot of my time writing because anything else doesn't feel as fulfilling. The most is never attainable. Doesn't exist. But the least is where it's at. And after that, for me, everything's a bonus. It's not that I would not love millions of people to read my writing. It's not that I wouldn't love to make really powerful, impactful businesses in the world that change lots of people's lives. It's not any of that. It's not a limitation on any of that. But it's not being attached to the outcome. And the way to not be attached to the outcome is to always be reminded every day of how little you're actually content with in your lifestyle. And that's the minimum viable lifestyle. That's the MVL, what we call the MVL for short. The balance sheet. So let's leave this with a couple of concepts. Right? Comfort versus meaning. In Nepal, I wasn't comfortable swinging around in that shower, I'll tell you that. But how meaningful the experience was because it stripped away all the bullshit in life and left that sense of community and connection and peacefulness and removed the barriers to it. That meaningful state of being more than made up for it. So comfort versus meaning. Needs versus wants. Then versus now. Why are you going to put it off for? The fastest way to be rich is knowing your MVL. And that's the thing. It's not that I've stopped daydreaming about the future, what could come, the exciting journeys that come. But what if we daydream about tomorrow? Better yet, what if we daydream about today? Are you daydreaming about today right now? Are you daydreaming about tomorrow? Do you go to bed excited to do the first thing you're going to do in the morning? And do you wake up with energy? It's worth thinking about, isn't it? So I think that's enough for one day. Just remember that the blog post, The Minimum Viable Lifestyle, is what corresponds to obviously this set of podcast episodes. That's available at www.withjoewehbe.com, link in the show notes. You can also sign up on the blog or the website to get these links of the blogs and episodes to email. They come in the order that they were intended. Apart from that, I always end each episode by reminding you that if you think of anyone when you listen to this or watch this, to please share it with them, because after all, the best way to open 1,000 doors for you is to concentrate on opening doors for others.